Hello. Hello, good morning. Good morning. Hi. So I'm currently in my PJs and I'm going to be trying manual focus today, so bear with me. For today's video, I have my iPad here with a ton of notes on it, and I want to chat about film photography and how to get started with film photography, more specifically point and shoots. And then we're going to cut to another video that I recorded a few days ago where I unbox my new point and shoot camera and I talk a little bit about why I went with that point and shoot camera. So I do want to note straight off the bat here that this video is going to be focusing on point and shoot film, which tend to align a little bit more with my goals for shooting film, which is to document like travel and hanging out with friends and just my life. But a lot of the things that I talk about here are going to be applicable for other types of film as well. So if you're using like an SLR or something, a lot of these points should still hold up. But the focus of this video is on point and shoots. Okay, so the first thing to know about film is that there are quite a few formats. There's 35mm, medium format, large format, some other smaller formats as well. I shoot in 35mm color film, which is generally what you're gonna see in like available point and shoots. Throughout this video, I'm going to be talking about some different film stocks. A film stock is just like a particular type of film. They all have their own unique look. These are like brands you'll see from Fuji and Kodak, and you can get these in color and in black and white. But I'm going to be talking mostly about color film photography, and that's just because when you dive into black and white film photography, the development costs can be more than just standard color film because it's a different chemical process, and I don't have any experience with black and white film, so we're just going to chat about color today. Alright, so like the first thing you're probably going to see when you go to buy a disposable or like a roll of film is the ISO on that film, and that's like a number that can range between, I think it's like 32 and 6400, and that number represents the sensitivity of the film to light. So a higher ISO value has higher sensitivity to light, and the film grains that comprise each picture are going to be bigger, whereas a lower ISO means less sensitivity to light and smaller film grains. So to be like straightforward, what I would recommend is if you are intending to shoot outside in bright daylight and only in bright daylight, I would recommend something like ISO 200 speed film. That's going to be a great outdoor film. If you want to shoot with maybe more mixed conditions, the recommendation is like a 400 speed to 800 speed film. That will give you a good mix of bright outdoors and cloudy outdoors and some indoors with flash. And that's where I tend to buy my film. I almost exclusively now buy 400 to 800 speed film. So other like higher speeds like 1600 or 3200, those are used when there's pretty much exclusively low lights or indoor situations. So I might recommend that for like a situation where you're at a concert and there's no flash photography, or something where it's going to be dark, maybe like a dinner and you don't want to have flash photography. You could probably get away with 1600 or 3200, but I've never used those personally just because those situations are so rare for me, and I want my film cameras to be a better all-around camera, and so that's why I tend to go for some of those middle speed films like 400 or 800, which provide a great range of environments you can shoot in. So when it comes to your first film camera, I recommend that you start out with the disposable. It simplifies a lot of the process. It's 27 exposures. You don't have to load the film or unload the film. There's no complexity in like trying to find a camera, doing a lot of what we're about to talk about with trying to purchase something that you don't really know if it works yet, or it makes the process of shooting so much more straightforward. And disposables, they're a great entry into film. They're very much plug and play. You take your shot, you wind up the next one, you take your next shot. It's that simple. You should be able to get one from any like Walmart or Target or CVS or any like big box store or drugstore. You should see them pretty much anywhere that has a little camera section in their store. A couple notes though about disposables. Over time, they do become more expensive than buying a point and shoot and buying a roll of film for that point and shoot. And the reason is you're only getting 27 exposures as compared to 36 on a standard roll. And with each disposable you're buying, you're not only buying the film, but you're buying like a little mini camera attached to that film. And that cost adds up over time. So while I think disposables are a great entry into film, a great like first 1 or 2 rolls, after that point, I would recommend looking into a point and shoot camera. I think that would be a great route to sort of take as an entry into film. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to buy your first point and shoot in a little bit, but for now we'll stick with the disposable talk. Another thing to note is that disposables use like really cheap film stocks, and so they're not great for any professional work, or like I probably wouldn't take one to a wedding unless you're prepared to just get some crunchy photos back, and maybe that's the look you want. But the photos are going to be a bit more lo-fi than a point and shoot camera, but it's still a nice look and it's super fun, and so I think it's like a good thing to do with friends. But just keep that in mind, that the photos they're going to be a little lo-fi, okay, a little bit crunchy. Another thing to note is that disposables have fixed ISO and aperture values. You're going to buy a whole disposable with the 200 ISO, and maybe that's the only one you have access to, but you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at the ISO, because if you buy a disposable with 200 ISO, you need to be prepared to take that in 200 ISO situations. Another thing to note is that it's a fixed aperture, and it's usually at f10. And what aperture is it's basically the amount of light the camera will let in for each exposure. A higher value means less light is let in. A lower value means more light is let in. With a value like f10, any situation besides super bright outdoors, you're going to need to use your flash. I want to show you a couple photos that I took with a disposable camera to give you an idea of some of these concepts and what you can expect as results from these cameras. You can see in this first one here that it's super underexposed. This is why you need a flash for every photo. I didn't know that the first time I had a disposable camera. Outside, it seems to be like a cloudy day, but it's by no means dark in this car, and still it came out underexposed. You can see there the disposable we're using. This is a Fujifilm one, but Kodak I'm sure is just as good. But yes, please use a flash. With photo number 2, I want to show you a pretty nice result from a disposable camera. This is sort of the quality you can expect. It's a bit grainy, it's a bit lo-fi, but these colors are really coming through quite nicely. Parts of the image are a little dark, parts of the image look great, but this is sort of like the result you should expect when shooting from a film camera. And same goes with these next two here. With these next two, I'm using a flash because I'm indoors, and you can see that it's very much that lo-fi look, I guess. I don't know, it's that disposable look, that's what it is. But you can see that at least with a flash, you'll get a nice image back. You might not get all the details of the background, but you'll have something to see. Alright, so next I want to move on to how do you develop your film. Let's say you've either shot your entire disposable or you shot on a point and shoot, and now you have a little roll that you're ready to get developed. How do we go about doing that? Well, first off, I would say while you can get the photos developed at a drugstore, like a CVS or a Walgreens, please don't. Please look up a local film lab and get your photos developed there. The results you'll get from a film lab, they'll be quicker and they'll be of higher quality. And that's because when you deliver your film to, say, a CVS, they just ship it off to somewhere else, and that other place handles it. And so it takes a while. And there's a lot of personal touch that goes into developing and scanning your film and getting those results back to you. And you really want a trained technician to be doing that. And you want to have that personality between you and your film, and someone to be able to call if the results aren't quite to your standard, or someone to ask questions to. And so really I would recommend going to your film lab if possible. So development happens in 3 parts. When people say getting your film developed, actually 3 parts. Actually 3 parts to that. The first part is development, which is where they take the actual film itself, they douse it in some chemicals, and at the end, this film has become a strip of negatives. When you go to get your film developed, you're going to want to use the C41 process. If you're developing any disposable or standard point and shoot, it'll be through the C41 process. You don't really need to know what that means, but that's the chemical process that they use, and I'm just saying that here because you may have to check a box of what process you want to use, and you'll want to select that one. After development, there's scanning. So scanning takes those negatives on that physical strip of film and it digitizes them, which allows you to post it to Instagram or upload it to your iCloud. If you just get your film developed and you don't get it scanned, you're just gonna have the negatives. You're not gonna have really anything to see. There's usually a few options when it comes to scanning. It'll be small, medium, high quality, and I tend to go for medium myself. I just find that medium is really the sweet spot between price and quality. Smalls are okay for something like Instagram, but if you want that photo for anything more than Instagram, if you want it for a memory or something that'll last you a long time and look great quality 10 years from now, I would recommend you go with medium. There's also usually a couple file formats that they offer. So my local one offers a .jpeg, or you can pay extra for .tiff. And I'm not going to get into the complexities of why you want to pay extra, but I personally do not. And if you don't know why you would need a .tiff file, you probably don't need a .tiff file. And then the third part is printing, which is just where they take your scans and they print it on some 4x6 cards and hand them back to you. I tend to not do that at my local film lab. I've just found it's a bit more expensive than pricing elsewhere. So I always just go for the development and the scans, and that's enough for me. But feel free to get them printed if you want a physical representation of your film. All right, so once a film lab completes your development and scanning process, they're gonna hand you back your film negatives, and that's the strip of film from like the canister or the disposable that's already been processed chemically. They're gonna hand that back to you. This is pretty important. I'd recommend keeping them in a cool, dry place just for like long-term storage. And this is one of the big important distinctions between getting your film developed at like a CVS versus a film lab. A CVS is gonna throw out your negatives, and a film lab will hand them back to you. And the reason you want those negatives back is that if you lose your scan, or for some reason, like you just have to delete photos from your iCloud and you accidentally delete that one, you're gonna be able to take those negatives and get them rescanned, maybe at even a higher resolution or higher quality, and you'll be able to have them again. And so those negatives are sort of like an insurance policy almost. I keep all my film negatives. One time my local film lab accidentally skipped scanning one photo, and I knew that photo was on there and I wanted it really bad, and luckily because they had my negatives, I could have them rescan that photo that they skipped over. If they had thrown them out, I never would have gotten that. And so it's really important that you value your negatives. All right, it's getting hot. Let's get down to business here. Let's talk about purchasing your first point and shoot camera. So when it comes to purchasing your first point and shoot, there's a few ways to go about it. The first consideration you're gonna have to make is where you're gonna purchase it from. Think like eBay, a local camera store. Go to Goodwill, maybe find something there. You could go to Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, or Etsy sells them. When I purchase a film camera, I tend to either go for like a local camera store if you have one, or eBay. I avoid places like Etsy because they seriously overcharge. I'm talking like double or triple the price that it's worth. I go to camera stores even though they tend to price higher than the value of the camera, because those camera stores also tend to test the film cameras before they sell them and have some sort of warranty or return policy in case it doesn't work. So usually if you buy from a camera store, you can expect like at least a 30-day guarantee, but sometimes when I purchase from them, I've gotten a 6-month guarantee, and like that's important for me because these cameras are 30 or 40 years old and you're just never gonna know if they're gonna last. So that's one big reason to purchase from a camera store. If you are price sensitive, you can purchase on eBay very successfully, and that's actually what I did recently. And you can shop around and get something for a lower price while also having a pretty good degree of confidence that it's gonna work. And we'll talk more about that in the last part of this video, where I tell you how I have confidence that it'll work and what types of things I look for when I buy from eBay. We're gonna be talking about some numbers here, but there's only a few key things you need to look for and you'll be good to go. So first, if we talk about a prime lens versus a zoom lens. A prime lens is also like a fixed focal length lens. For example, this camera we're looking at right here can zoom. So you can see, hello, it can zoom. A prime lens cannot zoom. It's the one focal length and that's it. Prime lenses tend to be higher quality than a zoom lens because there's less complexity in making that lens. So they tend to have higher sharpness, most noticeably. But zoom lenses, they're also great. I have a few zoom lenses. I love them. So don't discount them right away just because they're a zoom lens. They're great for travel and when you can't get up close to your subject. Just keep in mind like what you're looking for. Are you looking for something that can have flexibility and the type of pictures it's gonna take? And are you okay with some softness on the edges? Or do you really want something that is sharp? This is a prime lens. It doesn't zoom. Do you want something that's sharp and that has like the best glass possible? Okay, so like we talked about before, aperture is the next big thing I think about. So as we said, the bigger the aperture, the less light the film camera lets in. The smaller the aperture, the more light it lets in. For point and shoot film cameras, apertures of 2.0 to like 2.8 are considered great. Those are like the top tier that you're looking for. A lot of the super famous film cameras you've seen on YouTube that are like, you must have this point and and shoot, those are the well-known cameras with a 2.8 aperture. But cameras, I would say as low as like a 5-ish aperture. So usually you can find something with like a 4.5 or a 3.5. Those are great too. So another note is that with zoom lenses, the aperture when it's wide open is going to be a lot better than when it's zoomed in. That's okay. Just keep that in mind when you're looking at buying a camera. For example, with this camera, I don't know the exact number, but let's just pretend for a second that the aperture right now at wide open is like 3.5. When I zoom in all the way, it's probably now closer to a 6 or above a 6. The aperture on this one is 2.8. It's incredible. It's great. One other note about aperture is like where to find it. So on some cameras, you can see it just straight on the lens. Like this one here, it says 1 to 2.8, and that 2.8 is the aperture. On other cameras, you're not going to be able to see it on the lens, and you'll have to like look up the specs of that model online. I do think it's worth doing that though, to just make sure you're getting something of good quality or paying appropriately for the camera. You don't want to spend more than 75 bucks on a film camera that has an aperture greater than like 2.8. Additionally, when you're selecting a point and shoot, you're most likely going to be looking at like 80s type cameras or 90s type cameras. It's going to be one of the two. This is like a 90s type camera. It has a lot more features and it's like plastic, right? This one is an 80s camera. It is simpler. It is metal. There are two distinct looks. Usually the 80s will be more industrial. The 90s will be more, curvy, I guess. One of them isn't right or wrong. You'll see in just a moment when I unbox my new camera, it's a 90s camera. I did select something that was like more plastic, more 90s for a reason, and we'll talk about that, but both are super cool and I love the look of both of them for different reasons. I would just say to like have some intent with which type of camera you're looking for. And one reason that I might decide a 90s versus an 80s, and this is a real reason why I chose to buy this 80s camera at one point, is like the loudness. When I turn this camera on, that's how loud it is. So it's hard to get like a candid photo when I'm trying to shoot with this camera. This camera, it's just, that's it. And if I want to, I can be real like sneaky about it, right? Most people aren't going to notice that if it's like in a pocket or something. So once I see a camera that matches my expectations, matches the feel I'm looking for, I go to this website called lomography.com, and you can go there and type in the camera model, and there's a ton of sample photos from that camera, and you can see the kind of vibe that it gives off. There's a lot of variables, right? Each of these cameras nowadays operate a little bit differently because they're so old. So two of the same model are probably going to look a bit different. Some of them are going to have vignetting, some of them aren't. Some of them are going to have light leaks, some of them aren't. But you can get a general idea of what you might be able to expect in terms of like clarity or sharpness or things like that. And I want to show you what some of the photos from my various point and shoots look like. So these first couple photos here were actually on this camera, and I just wanted to point out one of the benefits of a zoom lens, which is that I can't get much closer to Alcatraz here, but I can zoom in on it, and it's like a cool picture to have of zoomed in on Alcatraz. And so a fixed focal length might not always be what you need, even though it may be a bit sharper. This second image here is actually from this camera, and I do want to point out the sharpness and the waves. This camera is like ridiculously sharp, and that's because of that fixed focal length, that nice aperture, and just the glass in this camera is really great. And this third photo here, this is my very first point and shoot camera. This had an f3.5 aperture, and it was a fixed focal length lens. I think this one's pretty cool too. I do just want to show you these so you can get an idea of the quality difference between a disposable and a point and shoot, because you are leaving some quality on the table when you use a disposable. And lastly, I just wanted to show you this picture of my friend taken with this camera here as well, because when you're looking at like lomography, you should try and look at people if you can, to see like how this camera shows people, how it portrays them. Is it harsh or is it like flattering? This camera is almost a little dreamlike, right? It has this beautiful like element on top of it, that just changes the story of the picture, I think. That photo is like trapped in nostalgia a bit, and some cameras are going to be more lifelike, some cameras are going to be more dreamlike, some are going to be sharper, some are going to be smudgy, and lomography is a great way to see some example photos from a lot of different people as to what you can expect in terms of quality from the camera you're looking at. I should note, lomography also has a lot of like experimental photographers, and so you're going to get some wacky things on there with like some color filters, but try and look at like the normal ones, let's say, like the more common types of photos you're going to take, or even just, you know, maybe you want to take those wacky ones. So look at the photos that you feel is going to best represent your photography and compare your expectations with those photos, and if it matches, then go for it. And whew, that is everything from my list of iPad things. I think that's it for me, so I'm gonna pass it on to Keith. But if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll try my best to answer them. I think foam is special, and I hope you do too, and I hope this video has helped. So yeah, if it has, you know, leave a like, drop a comment, I don't know, subscribe. But yeah, let's head on to part 2. All right. Hello. I have a little package, a little gift from me to me. 2 things actually. My birthday is in about a week, and so I thought I would get myself a gift. It is, in fact, happy birthday sunglasses. I'm turning 21, and I thought it would make for like a cool film photo. All right, thoughts on their design? White or pink? I can't really tell which one is better right now. I'm gonna have to look when I review this footage. Regardless though, let's move on to what's actually important here and the reason for this video. So I bought myself a new point and shoot film camera. Both of my old ones have in fact broken, so I had to buy a new one, which is always really filled with anxiety because you're like trying to shop around on eBay and you're trying to make sure that you get something that looks good and is of good quality while not being like super overpriced. I paid about $50 for this one, which is probably a little overpriced, but the seller ensured that it was tested, so we can talk a little bit more about what that means, but basically it's more likely to work than a camera that's just untested. All right. Voila. This is kind of nice actually. It is the Pentax IQ Zoom 70 XL, also in other markets sold as the Pentax Espio, I think it is. Awesome. I actually love the way this looks. Okay, let's talk about why this camera. I actually have 3 cameras to show you. Here are my old 3 cameras. Juliet, Romeo, Lady Capulet. This is my new one. This is gonna be Mercutio. These 2 are broken, but this one was my first one. It was the Konica MG, and this one was my second one. It's the Olympus Stylus 115 Zoom, and then this one is my third one, and this was like my favorite camera ever. This is the Ricoh FF90. But let's talk about this camera and why this one. What I really have been wanting is like a camera that I can take anywhere with me, and that's what all of these try and serve. But what I've noticed is these metal ones from like the 80s, they are awesome, they are heavy, they are like nice and tough, but when you drop this sucker, that metal like hits the ground. And actually that's how this one broke. These metal ones are awesome, you just have to be really careful with them, you have to baby them a lot. The plastic ones I find, or at least my theory, is that they hold up a little bit better, because I feel like the plastic can just like, I don't know, kind of like bounce off a bit more and like absorb it a bit better than that metal just hitting the concrete. I paid $50 for both of these cameras, granted at different times. This one, my new one, is definitely a downgrade, but it has a body more akin to what I was looking for, and it looks like quite modern, low-key. I did want something that would blend in quite well and was a little less like funky looking. When you're looking to buy a camera off of eBay, there's a few things you should know and a few practices that I always follow. The first one is that you, of course, always want to buy from a reputable seller, someone who has like 100% or above 98% positive feedback. You also want to make sure that it is tested, and you want to make sure that it's film tested. So what I've done so far has been, I've turned it on, I've made sure it works, I've made sure the flash works, the shutter works. I've looked inside, make sure there's no like issues with the battery or the compartments or anything like that. Like all the insides look okay, but that's still not film testing. What they do when they film test it, they put in a roll of film that they're not going to use, and they like take pictures with it to make sure that the mechanism is moving and that's like going through, and they make sure that the rewind works okay. What they don't do is they don't develop that film. So there's still a risk with this, which is that I could take all of these photos and then God forbid there's a light leak on this edge here and they're all like ruined. That could happen, but I at least know that the product I'm buying is mechanically like okay. If you can, I would try and buy from a place that has like a 6-month warranty. You'll probably pay a premium for buying at those places, but maybe a 6 months warranty on their used products, or a place where you can get returns if it doesn't work. Like this did have returns, so if I try it out and it doesn't work, I can return it. And some other things you want to look out for. Generally speaking, you want them to have a picture of the insides of the film camera. You want to make sure that there's like no dust in here, that everything looks like neat in here, because this is where your film is going to live. And so this is really important to be clean and that it looks nice. And that's pretty much like the gist. That's kind of what I do. Like I could also test a couple other things here. Like I could test the countdown. Like now we're doing a self timer. Everything looks okay. Cool. That sounded okay. This is the zoom. That should work. I think everything looks okay, so let's go ahead and put our film in. What I'm using in this camera is pretty standard. Basically everyone uses a variant of this film. This one happens to be Portra 400. I prefer the 800 variant, but it was currently sold out. The 400 is almost as good. Portra 400 is a professional grade film. It is some of the best quality you can get from a film. It's also one of the more expensive films. I've shot on more budget-friendly films. I've shot on Ultramax and on Fuji Superia. You can usually find those in like a 3-pack for like 15 bucks is what it used to be. I don't know what the prices are anymore, but I found that I tend to prefer the Kodak colors over Fuji. I'm here in California and I feel like California bodes well with Kodak, whereas maybe a place like Seattle or like London might do better in Fuji. But there is a noticeable difference, I would say, between like an Ultramax or a Superia and a Portra. I know these are not the highest quality film cameras by any stretch of the imagination, but I can see the difference and it's pretty distinct. And so you will have to gauge your sensitivity to price. But for me, it tends to be that I will do a roll of film about once every 3 months or so, because I just take photos as I'm like living and seeing friends and going places. So it takes me about 3 months to fill up a roll. And since I shoot so little on a day-to-day basis, it makes sense to me to invest like the $10 extra per roll of film to have like the best quality. It took me forever to be convinced over to Portra 400, and now that I am, I do not regret it. So I'm gonna move the camera so you can see, I'm gonna move myself maybe, so you can see how to put film into pretty much any film camera. All right, so I'm just going to line it up here. This bottom piece going into the bottom here. And now what we're gonna do, I'm going to pull this over. How I usually do this is I just make sure that it's over the orange marker here. I try and keep this flat as possible. And same here, I wanna keep this as flat as possible. And then here, all I'm gonna do is close the door. And once I close the door, I cannot reopen it. Okay, you cannot open the door again, ever again. Please don't. Cool. Now you can see here it says 1, which means that it's ready to go. So now that the film is in there, you do not want to reopen this door. What you're going to do is you're going to take your 24 or 36 pictures. The camera is automatically going to know how many to take. It's going to automatically rewind it for you, and then you can open the door once it's automatically rewinded. But be aware, if you open this door, any photos that you've already taken will be ruined. You can close the door back up and take more photos, and those photos will be okay, but anything before that point will be ruined. So be careful. do not open the door, okay? All right, I'm gonna take my first film photo of us together on this new camera from me and Mercutio to you. Also, I'm gonna get my happy birthday glasses in there too. I'm gonna put them on top of you. Okay, 3, 2, 1, smile. That's great. I think that's all for now. My video memory card is running out of space, so I will catch you in another time and fill you in on any extra details I think are important about film. Thanks for joining me. Toodles.